Hello and welcome everybody to Professional Relationship Manager Podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Phelps, and we have a fantastic, wonderful guest, Zack. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well today. How about yourself?
You know, living the dream, as I always say.
That's right. And it does rain in Southern California. It is a light pouring rain here all morning. I'm just outside of LA today.
Well, I'm not feeling too good about that, considering we're up here in the Northeast and we're freezing. The cold weather has finally caught up to us, so it's a little chilly up here. But we've been lucky not to have a lot of snow, which I'm okay with. Right? If it's it's going to be cold, I'm okay with it. I was looking at your personal website, Mark, and obviously very interesting. We'll have Mark's personal website up here so everybody can take a look at it when we obviously launch the podcast. This is pretty crazy picture you have here on your personal website. What is that?
Yeah, so that's the background of one of the peaks in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And what I love about it is for two reasons. One, that it's not this monumental, like 14K, climb. But it is kind of a nice thing I can do while visiting my family up and down in the morning and get back. But the reason I chose that one is the peak that you can see isn't the actual peak. It's a false peak. And if you climb hills or mountains at all, you know that phenomenon where you think you've gotten to the top. And then as you approach that seeming top, you need to keep going because the actual peak is further on. And it just reminds me every day of what it's like to be in the business world.
I think I see a mountain lion somewhere there.
Yeah, that could be.
So we're going to go over a lot of things today. Obviously, you have a very successful career that you've progressed very well. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a hiring manager and what you've seen when it comes to recruiting and hiring and the tools. And we're going to talk a little bit about your progression in your career and how you got to where you're at today and how, what are some of the tools and processes that you've implemented to get there. And of course, you have an interesting background too, where you've been in the corporate world, but you've also been in the consulting world too, which, of course, a lot of people are scared of that, right?
Right.
There's cons of that. But I think, one of the things that I tell people, especially if you're actively looking for a job or in that transition, consulting is always a wonderful platform to utilize while you're going through the process. We'll talk a little bit about that consulting side because it's such a common question on my end. And so kind of starting things off, I mean, what started your kind of career off? It looks like you went to kind of a school of business and you started off,
right.
How did things start off a little bit? When you got out of high school and you started your career off, kind of what was kind of your goals to begin with, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I had spent a fair amount of time during high school working in the construction trade. And as I looked at what the people around me that had been in all their lives and their bodies were broken and what they did day to day, I made the decision very early on. I think this would have been like in the 8th or 9th grade that I wanted to move into the professional world, even though I didn't have a lot of family members that were in those types of roles. But that was a pretty easy and clear decision for me. And just as I was coming out of school, I had an opportunity at the time to join the startup community space within Minneapolis environment. There was a company there called Control Data at the time. They were spinning off companies all day long. And my first interview, of course, I had no idea what it was like to be in the business world and didn't even really know what it meant to be joining a startup. But I think it was one of the best things I did for my career because day one, the job I started at day one was different 3 months later and even different again 1 year after that. So as any of you have been involved in startups, it's an all hands on deck. Everyone on the team needs to do everything because you never have enough people. So I think that was a good launching point for my career.
How did you, your early part of your career back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you went to a couple companies to eventually you got to Aero Electronic. Right. How did you make your job changes back then?
Yeah, it was interesting. So part of it was through the informal network at the time and doing a great job in the positions that I was in as I progressed. I took a look at CEO types at that time and said of the most successful CEOs, what types of background do they have? And I went deliberately based on that to move from engineering into manufacturing, but I always knew I would need a sales component to my career. And that's when the opportunity arose at Aero Electronics. I wasn't out looking, but due to the network that I had, I got the phone call and ultimately joined them in a sales type role.
I mean, do you think sometimes it's in people's DNA. I mean, was networking just something that you felt was in your DNA, or did you have to learn how to be good at that?
I was absolutely the latter. I had to learn how to be good at that. I typically think more around how do I just perform every day rather than what's the importance of a network in terms of not only helping me in my current position, but to achieve the goals that I want, in my career and outside of both the for-profit world and in the nonprofit world.
So do you think there was something you look back on your career that kind of kicked you in the butt a little bit to know that, all right, this is important, that I need to be good at this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was pre-Aero days, in fact, when one of the startups that I was at, we went through an IPO, which was fantastic. And then they decided to move the entire company from Minneapolis to the state of Virginia. And I had no desire at that time to do a move. And I just looked up one day and thought, uh-oh, I haven't done anything to prepare myself for this move or to find the next job. And that was my, in the forehead, baseball bat at full speed, wake up call.
And what did you, I mean, that's a long time ago, right? So, I mean,
No,
that's,
it absolutely was.
you think about that, you think, back in the, even my, mid 90s, it was archaic and how you had to do things. I mean, literally, I remember I had a guy sitting next to me that had a card file, and
Right.
he had a couple of hundred, and it was amazing how he literally would call through 10 every day. And then he called through 10 every the next day, and then he called 10, and he just round robined it.
Right.
And what was your way of, back in the day, how big was your network that you would consistently communicate with, and how would you maintain it?
So I can tell you, not big enough, and it was very difficult for me to maintain it. So I did something very similar to the example that you have. What I started doing was calling those first 10, getting together for, a beer or a lunch or whatever, but more importantly, trying to leverage their network because I didn't have a broad enough one myself. So it was a school of hard knocks, though. It was very difficult to build that out. And I had no formal, both either training in building a network or any kind of guidance. It was difficult, to be honest.
So when you went to Aero, which, now you're getting in the typical world here where you've been you're going to be in the company from 94 to 2008, which
Right.
is 14 years. I'm seeing in your personal website a progression. So you've progressed from a manager to a general GM. You've progressed now. You're starting to grow. Did you drop your network at that point? Were you focusing on Aero all the time, or did you maintain your network at Aero too?
Then, based on my prior experience, I decided to formally start building one just for my own use, right? So not only within Aero, who was now a very, very large company, so I had exposure to many more people there. Also within the electronic distribution industry, I would deliberately go to conferences and get outside my Aero brethren and meet as many people as I could to try to keep building that network and keep a broader, more deliberate sense in mind.
At what point did you start managing people? Was that at Aero or previous to that?
It was previous to that, but always in pretty small scale. It was 5 people, 10 people, not hundreds of people.
So how did you hire back then?
Yeah, that was usually through a network, but this was a network in terms of 1 or 2 phone calls. Who do you know that would be qualified for that? At that time, I was hiring entry-level people. So the risk of making a mistake was much lower. So it was much easier to just make 1 or 2 phone calls, find 1 or 2 viable candidates and, go through the interview process. But again, entry-level people, not executive or mid-management types.
What, just curious, you had such a long career with Aero. What made you suddenly leave Aero to go to DigiKey?
Yeah, there was an absolute opportunity for me to see a different version of that model, of the wholesale distribution model. So Aero was brick and mortar, very, very large scale. And in my home state of Minnesota was this company called DigiKey that was crashing through the e-commerce space. So they're essentially like the Amazon of electronic components.
Mm.
And Arrow didn't do a whole lot of that. So having the opportunity to sort of radically change my position within the same industry was really intriguing to me.
Did they find you? Is it through a colleague? How did you get the job?
Right. It was through a colleague. So one of the guys that I worked with at Arrow, Dave Doherty, had left Arrow for some of the same reasons, went to DigiKey. He was a hiring manager. And as they were using a recruiter, they had the recruiter reach out to me, and we went through the process from there.
So it was a referral, though, at the end of the day.
It was a referral. Right.
And it looks like this. So this is your first opportunity where you were progressed into a VP role.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So I joined the company knowing that there were going to be some movement shortly thereafter at DigiKey, and if I could adopt their methodology, mentality of marketing and e-commerce first, and the rest of what I was doing second. Also bringing in that element of what developed, started as entrepreneurship into intrapreneurship, of being able to do a lot of experimentation all at the same time, knowing there would be a decent failure rate, but that was how we were going to progress the company. So that allowed me to move from, again, relatively small group that I was managing at the director level into a VP level, where then kind of the scope of responsibilities started to expand a little bit more exponentially.
So, and again, I look here as you're progressing. So what are we doing now? We're in the mid, 2009 to 2014 timeframe. Where is our network at now outside of DigiKey? How big is it? How many people are you communicating outside within your network to stay connected?
Right. So in the LinkedIn space, and there's a variety of network connections within that, but I now have about 3,000 people within that LinkedIn community. I'll tell you the leapfrog, and you haven't brought it up yet, but for me, getting into a more formal methodology of forcing myself in the busy world that we all live in to keep that networking alive was when I joined HelloFellow. It was, a little bit of time ago, maybe in the early stages of your development, but that methodology to be able to communicate with people in the right fashion really improved my hit rate in terms of keeping track and staying in touch with a lot of people. Right.
It was funny. And this is a really good story, by the way, and I loved it, and I tell it quite often. When Mark first joined Fellow, and we were going through the process and organizing his contacts and his personal website, and kind of getting that organization, and he started to reach out to his network. It was funny. One of the first calls we had discussing how things were going was, you couldn't believe how much of the process helped your equal as one.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So tell us a little bit about the equal as one.
No, absolutely. So just prior to joining Fellow, my son-in-law, who's an MD, and my daughter, who's a physician assistant, had a concept to start up a nonprofit that would provide healthcare in developing countries. They both had a passion for international travel, as did I, and it seemed like the right thing. And while I had been involved in other nonprofits, like, on the executive board of a food shelf and all that, I hadn't started one myself. So the great side benefit that started coming from reconnecting using the Fellow tools was finding out there was a whole side of my network that I had no idea how involved they were in nonprofits, and how a number of them had started up nonprofits themselves. So I could leverage their knowledge base of this, what they went through, what worked, what didn't work. So as then we decided to formally launch Equal as One, we had all of their knowledge base that helped get us off the ground and get started in an accelerated fashion.
So we'll show everybody the Equal as One. So it's equalasone.org. equalasone.org. So EQUALASONE.org. So everybody check that out. And again, it looks like we're all the way back from July of 2016 when you've kind of started this. How are things going at this point?
Yeah, fantastic. So we got to the stage by last spring where we bought our first land in Nigeria, which will be the site of our first medical clinic. We're doing capital campaign right now to raise the funds for that clinic. But we've developed the full business plan for that clinic and for the organization overall. Last August, we went there for our first 1-week mission trip treated over 800 people, which was phenomenal. We went into it expecting, hey, if we could touch 100 people this week, we'll call it a success. And literally on day one, more than 600 people were waiting for our arrival. We went in with a team of 8 kind of medical, non-medical people combined. Obviously, I'm a non-medical person, but that really launched us up to a new level. We were able to meet all the political leaders of Nigeria, from mayors to senators. We were involved in one of the senators' campaign launch while we were there, so it was really fun event. And we're going back in June, and we hope, as you know, if you and I speak this time next year, that we're breaking ground on a new building.
So how do you think this has helped you in the business world? Has it helped you in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it brings in a whole dynamic just in terms of conversations, where I'm much more comfortable now in having non-work conversations during a work dinner. So it's not always about what's your favorite football team doing. It's what can we do as a group. I keep learning more and more about other people as I do that, who say, yes, I'd always wanted to be involved in a nonprofit, or more importantly, I'm involved in one as well. Look, here's what we're doing. And we start comparing notes on what's working and not working. So those benefits have been, huge.
Listen, you and I have talked about this many times, and this is one of those things that I always say, and I do myself, making yourself accessible to your network, right? Not telling your network what you need, but making yourself accessible creates dialogue, which creates opportunities that you can't even think about, right? And when you start to do that with people over many years, it's not like you send an email out to 10,000 people here, right? Even though you have multiple thousand, you really communicate with a core small audience, but you're consistent about it. And when you make yourself accessible, these are the doors that open. And that's one of the things that I stress, Mark's been a consultant for was a little over a year there back in 2016. But I got to make the assumption a little bit, but being in that role and engaging your network outside probably taught you a lot.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And a couple other things, being in that consultant role that led to other opportunities, which then things begin to snowball, right? So one of the things I did during that period of time was to join a software integration firm's advisory board. So this was on the for-profit side, but what's been the ancillary benefit of doing that during those consulting days was then gaining their knowledge base, more knowledge from their board, and how I could apply that both in my own practice and how I've applied it both on the nonprofit side and in the business that I'm working in right now.
So let's kind of talk about some more specific stuff. So one is, just for everybody, as a hiring manager or as a candidate today, as you've progressed, what are your thoughts of job boards? LinkedIn job boards, Monster, Indeed.
Right.
What do you think about them as a hiring manager? And what do you think about them as a candidate from your perspective?
So as a hiring manager, I think they're good for entry-level roles. I think once we get beyond entry level, we've found the success rate or reaching good candidates drops off very quickly, and a whole lot of noises come into us when we're at the mid-level or above. So I think they're, entry level out of college, I think they work okay. For myself, it went nowhere for me when I was going down that path. In fact, just turned out to be, as I give advice to others who were in the role that I was in, trying to look for, my next job in life or my next career progression point, it was little or no value, and really it was a time sink. It was a waste of time for me to be involved as someone trying to find a role.
Let's jump on to the LinkedIn side of things. So obviously you've been a part of LinkedIn for quite a few years now.
Right.
And again, just to let our audience know, how is LinkedIn, what do you feel about it as a hiring manager, and how it's been successful and not successful? And how do you think it's been as your evolution going through from LinkedIn when it comes to from a hiring manager and a career perspective? Kind of the same thought process when it comes to LinkedIn. What are your thoughts there?
Right. I think LinkedIn has been changing. So if we all agree on that, what the value it provided 10 years ago isn't where it is today. It's becoming in my opinion, a little bit too much of a social network rather than a job networking kind of function. And by that, I mean, things coming into discussions outside of the workplace. So it starts to lessen its value there a little bit. However, having said that, if I'm looking for a candidate in a very specific field like engineering who might have between 5 and 15 years of experience, because of the connection points that I've built on LinkedIn, it's a little bit easier to source someone in that range of a career experience. Don't use it at all and have no plans to use it in terms of a search for an executive level person, though. I don't think that's the right form for that kind of a search.
So are you, when it comes to hiring as a hiring manager today, where do you find majority of your time? Are you utilizing your networks, or is your staff utilizing LinkedIn and doing searches in LinkedIn? I mean, where do you find most of your hiring is going today?
Yeah, so I would say personal networks are number one. That continues to bring in, the best candidate pool or field that we have. I found using Fellow platform, for example, I'm just starting a search right now for a president level person, and using my network that either they're ready for a progression, in that direction, or they know someone who would be a good candidate. So that third party, discussion point amongst all the other discussion that we have during a network. But I'm seeing the best progress using a campaign to get to where I want to go with, let's call it VP level and above.
So obviously the ability in one of the things that you've valued, which I've kind of value on your end, is you've organized your network to give you that opportunity to do that, which is obviously the advantageous of CRM technology is the ability to organize yourself. So you would have to say you're pretty organized at this point. I mean, tell us, when it comes, I know you said you have multiple thousand connections, but honestly, how many people do you really consistently communicate with in your network?
Yeah, that's down at a much lower level because I just don't have the bandwidth. And if I let things take its own course, it'd be easy for me to step back at the end of the week and say, well, I had zero bandwidth. But forcing me into 3 discussions a week from a network perspective seem reasonable right now. It can fit with that work balance because it drives enough value, and setting aside the time to keep doing that. Obviously that fluctuates. Last week at CES, for example, that number went up much, much higher. The week before that at the holidays, closer to non-existent. But if I can clip along at that 3 to 5 connection points a week, I think that's reasonable.
And so giving advice to people today, right? You got 20% of the market that, it's amazing the numbers, 20% of the market are actively looking, 50% would leave their jobs today, 70% of people are unhappy at their current company and job today. It's amazing, even though you look at unemployment rate is low. But what is your key advice? What are your top key advice to someone looking for a career, a new job change? What process do you advise to them to best help them, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a number of good elements out there. Having a good career coach is number one. And I've used the coach at a number of different times in my own progression, and can't sell that, the benefits of doing that enough. Because at times for me, frankly, it was the career coach that led me to do more in the nonprofit world, something I hadn't considered at all in my life. But she was able to take a look at me and say, hey, characteristics of what you do and what you enjoy doing, you would fit in perfect doing some work over there. So career coach for a number of different reasons. Career coaches allowed me to look outside my current sort of vertical functional area and say, why don't you go try to find a role outside of your current functional area? So that's kind of number one, first and foremost. Writing a resume that is current, 2020s type resume, rather than, for me, I was looking at like a 1990s resume. So I was kind of instantly sort of putting myself into a bucket that I didn't want to be in. And then the clear element for me in my last round was segmenting my network base down to executive hiring managers who I could interface with on a very broad basis, right? So not just the people who I knew in sales, even though I was looking for a sales type role, but interfacing with people across multiple functional areas, because all of those have a tap point into sales or operations, and where I'm at now, more of a general management type role. But I started getting opportunities across a breadth of different companies, different roles, instead of segmenting myself into just one.
Yeah, I think as I stress so heavily, and you and I talk about this too, is a lot of times, even with, I have a lot of fantastic resume writers out there and coaches and that I know, and, you have candidates that go out there and, they'll spend $2,000 on a resume, but they don't spend any time or money or thought on the process of how they communicate that resume, right? I mean, how they communicate to that network. So we don't think much about process, but it sounds like to me, as you've evolved here and as your network has gotten bigger, process is such an important piece now. How do you organize your contacts? Who are the right people to be reaching out to? How are you reaching out to them? What are you saying? All that stuff is an important piece now that, again, you didn't have to think about 20 years ago. You just made a couple phone calls and hired somebody. Well, we're in a whole different climate today, right? 400 million profiles. People are changing jobs every couple of years because of the volatility. That process now is important. And that's what I try to stress too so heavily is process, process, process. You create a wonderful process, staying engaged with your network. And because you're a great product, it'll be very easy for you to create opportunities for yourself. It's now the process you choose. Are you going to use job boards? Are you going to call these recruiters you've never met before in your life? Or are you going to create a process around your 20-year network?
Right.
And that's one thing, Mark, that you've done fantastic. And I think from my end, and again, I just use you very heavily from mine, is that the most rewarding thing that I get out of this. I mean, obviously you found a wonderful job and I'm glad that you feel organized, but I just think the experience that you got on this Equal as One is just fantastic to me.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. If we can go out and help, if we can go out and help underserved people that literally get no medical care in their lives, and make a little bit of change in the life expectancy, that's a way bigger reward than anything we get paid to do it on a daily basis.
No, and that's that whole concept that I try to stress to people is, reach out to your network, making yourself accessible. You should always be asking your network what you can do for them, right? What can I do for you? That's that model that I always stress with you. And that's what allows you to do that even when you love your job. Because everybody's scared to reach out to their network when they're love their job and they're actively looking. Well, listen, reaching out to your network, staying accessible doesn't have anything to do with looking for a job. Will it create one? Sure. But it's making yourself available and accessible. And you've done a wonderful job of that. And that's why you've built this wonderful Equal as One. So everybody, Equal as One, check it out. Is there a way to donate on it?
Yep, absolutely. We're GuideStar approved. We've got a great rating on there as a nonprofit. We're fully transparent. And there's absolutely a donate button on there. So thank you for broadcasting equalasone.org.
Yeah, equalasone.org. Mark is also the VP and GM at Symmetry Electronics, which is a fantastic company. How did you guys do in 2018? How was business?
We had a phenomenal year. Well outgrew the rest of our industry. We grew the business year on year 47% at the top line and grew even healthier at the bottom line. So it was a fun year, and we'll likely do the same thing this current calendar year.
So listen, everybody out there, we're going to put Equal as One up so everybody has it, so you can go to it and donate or learn more about it. We'll put your personal website up there, Mark.
Perfect. So
people can have access. Feel free to reach out to Mark if you have any questions. Obviously, he's a great networker. So, feel free to reach out to him if you need to. His personal website will be there. Check it out. Thank you so much, Mark, for being a part of the show here. I appreciate it so much.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And thank you personally. And you and I have had this discussion for everything fellow has helped me do in terms of adding some science to what I was doing anyway, in terms of networking.
No, that's awesome. I'm so glad that we're able to help you. And just everybody know too, that we're starting, we actually started this week and we're going to have a new one every week. We have this really cool thing now, Mark, where we're starting, it's called a 60-day challenge. We're going to help an individual find a job in 60 days.
Right.
We pretty much take them through a process of every week of having, we're going to have a live meeting every week, a live webinar. We had our first one today. Hundreds of people showed up for it.
Fantastic.
And we're going to go through every week the process that kind of you and I went through of that process of, your digital presence and how to get organized and how to communicate. We're going to do it over an 8-week period of time, once a week. And of course, lots of the individuals are fellow members that are joining. You don't have to be a fellow member to go through the process. It's obviously easier if you become a fellow member, but we'll go through that systematic approach of, and you could probably say the same thing, no one's finding a job in 2 weeks here, right? I mean,
right, no, absolutely.
Right. But
Yeah.
I emphasize so heavily, it's the effort you put into it, right? You can't, the world of being found is over with, right? You got to put some effort in, you got to create a process for yourself. So we're doing that in a wonderful way now in a live, weekly live chat over Zoom. We're going to do every week, and we're going to start a new one every week. So it'll be an 8-week process. So anybody that's interested in that, we'll have a link here that you can select and join. Again, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything to be a part of this process. If you decide to join Fellow to help you, you can do that. If you don't want to. But we're starting that wonderful, we actually started this week, but we'll be having a new one that starts every week. So we're super stoked about that.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Great
Mark,
approach.
So Mark, if you have anybody that you want to recommend.
I will. Well, through the network, that's a great. I bring up Fellow all the time, Kurt, and I'll continue now. I'll point them towards that. What a great tool.
Yeah.